open up additional areas to oil and gas development. Over in the Senate, they continue debate on Democratic and Republican proposals dealing with expiring 2001 and 2003 tax cuts. You can follow the Senate on C-SPAN 2 and now live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain today, Reverend Bud Rowland, St. John Newman Catholic Church, Austin, Texas.
Good and loving God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the gift of public service. We ask for your blessings on these women and men who serve on our behalf. Grant them the wisdom to be humble in collaboration, the vision to consider the needs of all American citizens, and the desire to protect our freedom as they provide for the common good. Direct their deliberations to be good leaders and guide them in fruitful dialogue. May your grace shine forth in all their proceedings. May they enact just laws for our government, and may they seek to preserve peace, promote the national happiness, and continue to bring us the blessings of liberty and equality. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. A pledge of allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated.
The Chair will remind the House that on July 24, 1998, at 3:40 p.m., Officer Jacob J. Chestnut, Detective John M. Gibson of the United States Capitol Police were killed in the line of duty defending the Capitol against an intruder armed with a gun. At 3:40 p.m. today, the Chair will recognize the anniversary of this tragedy by observing a moment of silence in their memory. Without objection, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to a good and decent man, a man of God, a man of faith, a man who has devoted his entire life to the service of his fellow man. Father Bud Rowland, whom we affectionately call Father Bud, is our guest chaplain today and is a pastor of St. John Newman's Catholic Church in Austin, Texas. A native of Amarillo, Father Bud was ordained a Roman Catholic priest in January 1999. He was inspired to convert to Catholicism by a loving and generous man in Amarillo named Jordan Grooms, who also inspired scores of others to go into the priesthood. I'm thankful for that this man impacted Father Bud, who has gone on to shepherd so many with great love and great leadership. Father Bud is revered, admired, and loved by all whose lives he has touched. It has been a great privilege to call him my pastor, and everyone who knows him experiences the true message of Christ. In his words and in his deeds, and above all in his heart, his example is a beacon of light which draws us all closer to the Creator. I am reminded of Romans chapter 8, verse 28, which says, "We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." We are blessed, and the world is a better place because Father Bud was called according to his purpose. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the leadership and dedication of Mrs. Rita Hamilton, as shown to the Republican Party of Arkansas and the Republican National Committee. Ms. Hamilton has made a lifelong commitment to advancing conservative causes. Her career began as a volunteer in political activism in 1995, and she's gone on to hold positions including first vice chairman of the Republican Party of Arkansas, an appointee to the Governor's Appointments Committee, and a member of the Republican National Committee's Women's Leadership Forum. She's served as a National Committee woman for the Republican Party of Arkansas since 2004, and as a member of the National Rules Committee, she's able to influence party nominations and messages. Ms. Hamilton has been a delegate to every Republican National Convention since 1992. She's also a 2012 RNC Convention Committee member. Mr. Speaker, today I honor Ms. Rita Hamilton for her commitment to our common sense conservative ideals and thank her for her service. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exactly 2 months ago, I was in Afghanistan breaking bread with our troops, and I asked them, "What is your biggest worry? What keeps you awake at night?" Thinking it had to be the Taliban lurking in the nearby mountains. Well, it wasn't. Their biggest fear, and I heard this over and over, was the fear of coming back to this country and not finding a job. At this point in our country, over 30% rate is the rate of unemployment for recently returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. That is absolutely unacceptable. We've taken some steps in Congress. The tax credit for employers is a good start. And I introduced a VETS bill which would help veterans receive professional certification training for the skills they've already acquired abroad. I also want to recognize that the VA and the Department of Defense are recognizing that we need to do much more to help these individuals transition into civilian society. In fact, tomorrow we're having a joint hearing with the Armed Service and Veteran Affairs Committee to just address these matters. As I've told many veterans groups, we didn't get it right after Vietnam. We have so much more to help them reintegrate into society and help them heal their wounds. I say, instead of just giving them a thank you, let's give our veterans a job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, since the President took office, his administration has enacted over 400 new government regulations limiting small business owners from creating new jobs. This year alone, the Federal Register has published over 41,000 pages of regulations that would cost $56.6 billion and result in paperwork that would take over 114 million wasted hours to complete. With record unemployment, it's sadly clear the President's new taxes and policies are failing American families and destroying jobs. House Republicans are focused on putting Americans back to work. As a result, we have passed over 30 job creation bills in the past year. Sadly, these bills remain stalled in the liberal-controlled Senate. This week, the House, led by Kevin Brady, will vote on the Red Tape Reduction and Small Business Job Creation Act and once again attempt to remove government red tape prohibiting America's job creators from achieving economic success and creating jobs. I hope we can work together to support this legislation. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we'll never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Secretary,
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
revise and extend if necessary.
The gentleman seek unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent?
I do seek unanimous consent.
Without objection, the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. This weekend, the whole country was struck with the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado. A deranged individual murdered 12 citizens and wounded 58 others. My mind went back to the day that Gabrielle Giffords was shot, another deranged individual. And what it says to me is we need to spend more money, not less money, on mental health issues. There are a lot of mentally disturbed people out there who need mental health treatment, and this Congress has been cutting funds for mental health and for clinics and for health care, and we need more law enforcement and more protection. There are cuts that can be made to protect our country's fiscal health, but to protect our nation's physical health, some funds need to be maintained. Let's think before we cut. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For purposes, the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition. Without objection, the gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and it is with great pride, admiration, and affection that I rise to recognize Dr. Virgilio Beato Nunez, an outstanding member of the South Florida medical community, on his very well-deserved retirement. In his 69 years of medical practice, he has improved the lives of countless individuals and has enjoyed a career of many achievements. Dr. Beato is a great example of the patriotism and dedication that we see throughout our nation and also to his profession. Forced to flee from the oppressive communist regime of Fidel Castro, Dr. Beato began his new life and his career in Miami. He then moved to San Antonio, Texas, where in 1974 he was elected Vice President of the American Heart Association. In 1977, Dr. Beato moved back to Miami, where he helped many struggling young doctors who had moved to freedom in the United States. He has received many awards, including a proclamation by the City of Miami naming Dr. Virgilio Beato Day and a congressional recognition in 2006 for his many contributions to the medical field. Congratulations to Dr. Beato on his retirement, and I wish him all the best in this new exciting chapter in his life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont seek recognition? The gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Does
the gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Yes.
Without objection, gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, retailing is an important part of the American economy. The Main Street retailers, bricks and mortar retailers, play an essential function providing access to stores in communities. They're the engine of downtown revitalization. E-commerce retailers are emerging as a very strong retailing force, providing convenience and low cost to consumers. The challenge we face is having a level playing field between these two retailers. The way things stand right now, if a state assesses the sales tax, Main Street retailers have to collect it. E-retailers, more often than not, don't. That's not a level playing field for them to compete on a fair basis. There are two bills in the House to resolve this, the Main Street Fairness Act and the Marketplace Equity Act. Both I am a co-sponsor of with bipartisan support. Fair is fair. We're making progress on this. Just recently, the governors from both parties attending the National Governors Association spoke in favor of the importance of updating federal law so that there will be this level playing field. And just this morning, in Chairman Smith's House Judiciary Committee, there was a hearing on the Marketplace Equity Act. Let's bring this to a floor for a vote. Let's pass it. Let's return fairness. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For purposes, the gentleman from New Hampshire seek recognition. The gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Yes.
Without objection, the gentleman from New Hampshire is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to add my voice to those calling attention to the harmful tax hikes that could soon come our way. With tax cuts set to expire at midnight on December 31st of this year, the Obama administration wants some of those taxes to increase. I think that would inflict a body blow to our economy and prolong this recovery. A recent study by the accounting firm Ernst & Young finds raising these taxes would cause the estimated loss of 700,000 jobs. Wages would be reduced by 1.8%, and our economy would shrink by 1.3%. My state of New Hampshire relies heavily on small businesses. It is the backbone of our economy. And this tax hike would hit small businesses especially hard because at least 75% pay their taxes as individuals. I think that of the many job creators in my district, such as Hampshire Fire Protection and Londonderry, they face enough challenges without Washington imposing higher taxes and that burden on their small business. With the nation's unemployment at 8.2%, we simply cannot afford to lose an additional 700,000 jobs. And that is why I say we must stop this tax hike, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Hampshire's time's expired. For purposes, the gentlelady from from California seek recognition.
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we lost a true hero in Sally Ride. Dr. Ride was a constituent, and I recall my excitement in first meeting her years ago. At the age of 32, Sally K. Ride broke her first barrier when she flew on the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1983. She was the first American ever to fly in space. But her journey didn't end there. She went back to space in 1984 and later on became director of the California Space Institute at UCSD, as well as a professor of physics. She was a trailblazer in every sense of the word. She cracked open the door for women to enter the fields of science and engineering and helped inspire countless young girls to follow in her footsteps. I think what it will mean to my granddaughter Jane to see her in our history books. Dr. Ride will be missed by all those who knew her and all those who she touched and will continue to reach with her courage, her determination, and fearless spirit. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For purposes, the gentlelady from South Dakota seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise these in my remarks.
Without objection, gentlelady from South Dakota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to bring up a subject today that's on the minds of people all across this country, and this is the drought that is hitting so many people and our economy. I was recently in the northwest corner of South Dakota and had the chance to drive all the way across the state and visit with producers and communities that have been hit so hard. I'll tell you the facts are clear. We have feed shortages, stock dams are going dry, and there's escalating feed costs that are hitting our producers every single day. Our livestock producers undeniably take a great risk. They don't have the crop insurance programs that many of our commodity producers do have and that protects them and gives them a safety net. That's why our livestock disaster programs are so important. I was proud of the fact that I introduced legislation that reauthorized those programs earlier this year and that they were included in the committee version of the Farm Bill that came through the House Ag Committee earlier. That's why it's so important that we get our Farm Bill work done, that we bring it to the House floor and have a vote so that our livestock producers truly can have a safety net that our commodity producers already enjoy. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For purposes, the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition. Without objection, gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this week Washington plays host to the International AIDS Conference, a conference that brings together activists, scientists, people living with HIV to mourn those millions who have been lost to that disease around this world, but also to celebrate some very real progress made against that disease. HIV is no longer a death sentence for those who are diagnosed. That's a very large accomplishment that the U.S. government can claim some credit through research at NIH, CDC. Small things, like the fact that the city of Washington can be host because the President's administration lifted the travel ban on people with HIV. Mr. Speaker, there is also something for us to learn. The Bush administration, which I didn't always agree with, also can take enormous credit for PEPFAR, a program which saved millions of lives in Africa and Asia and which earned us the respect and the love of people around this planet. We should learn from that, to work together to end this disease, to make sure that those with it are treated and that we prevent it and ultimately end it. That should be our goal. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For purposes, the gentleman from Texas seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I seek permission, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today as an original co-sponsor of the Federal Reserve Transparency Act of 2011, authored by my colleague from Texas, Ron Paul. I commend Congressman Paul for his years of diligence in pursuing this issue. It has long since been time for the Federal Reserve to commit to an audit. This legislation requires the Comptroller General to complete an audit of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and of the Federal Reserve Bank. Many of my constituents have been calling and writing and asking me for this significant new transparency of the Federal Reserve. I agree with them on the urgent need for accountability. This legislation is an important step forward in achieving that goal. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting the Federal Reserve Transparency Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Now that it's the law of the land, it's time for everyone in the country to take a deep breath and a look at what really is in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. If you're a senior citizen, you're now receiving a 50% discount on brand name drugs if you fall into what is called the donut hole, the Medicare prescription drug coverage gap. If you're a woman, you now have free coverage of life-saving preventive services such as mammograms. And beginning on August 1st, free coverage is going to include many additional preventive care services. So take a good look at that. If you're a parent, if you have children under age 19, they cannot be denied coverage by an insurance company because they have a pre-existing condition. And if you're a young adult, you can now stay on your parents' health care plan until your 26th birthday, which is really important if you don't have a job that has health insurance coverage. And if you're a small business owner, like my son is, there are millions now of eligible small business owners that are receiving tax credits if you choose to offer coverage to your employees. So take a look. It's really good for most Americans. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last week I met with Dr. Loretta Williams, an oncology nurse from MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. For 30 years, Dr. Williams has provided care to cancer patients, whether they have battled the disease for years or they are just beginning that fight. I was impressed by her compassion and her dedication. People like Dr. Williams are why MD Anderson is the greatest cancer center in the world, named the top hospital for cancer care for the 6th year in a row. While its innovative cancer research is most impressive, dedicated and knowledgeable staff are the reasons why it remains the #1 center for cancer care. It all starts with the top with Dr. Ronald DeFino. Dr. DeFino is an impressive individual. His main motivation is to provide the best care possible to patients while conducting creative research to dramatically reduce the number of deaths from cancer. This year, MD Anderson will see its 1 millionth patient since its doors opened in 1944. Each day, lives are forever changed by the staff and the volunteers who are tenaciously determined to stop cancer. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
From Texas yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, a recent report issued by American and Canadian scientists with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans reveals alarming findings regarding the health of our Great Lakes. The report warns that Asian carp are closer to entering the Great Lakes than we had anticipated. When introduction occurs, it will be irreversible and devastating to the ecology of the lakes and the economy of the region. This report is an urgent reminder that it is imperative that we intensify our efforts and act immediately to prevent Asian carp from entering the Great Lakes. Today, I, along with 15 of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle, sent a bipartisan letter to the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps of Engineers calling attention to this study and urging swift action on the threat of the Asian carp to the Great Lakes environment. Keeping our waters healthy and free of invasive species is a federal responsibility. It's time to act, and to act now. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition? Without the gentleman from Oregon seek unanimous consent?
I'm just going to address the House. I don't need to revise.
Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent to address the House?
Certainly.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
1989, I sponsored a bill along with 11 other Democrats to audit the Federal Reserve. Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial saying we would destroy the American economy if we audited the Federal Reserve. Well, guess what? 18 years later, Wall Street destroyed the economy of the United States of America. Wall Street, the big banks, and then they were bailed out secretly by the Federal Reserve. We don't know how many trillions of dollars the Federal Reserve committed to them. We know their profits were billions, tens of billions, on the bailout they got. So it's past time to audit the Federal Reserve. Today we'll take up a bill, finally, Ron Paul's bill to audit the Reserve. I strongly support it. I also urge members to support my bill, which would establish conflict of interest rules for the Federal Reserve and take the two-thirds of the Federal Reserve that is controlled by Wall Street banks, take those people off the board and put citizen representatives who represent the taxpayers and the consumers of the United States, not the big banks, on that board.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the General Accounting Office revealed that the debt ceiling crisis the Republicans put this country through last August cost us taxpayers $1.3 billion. Now Americans are hearing that they may be put through that ringer again. I hope my Republican friends would agree with me that the middle-class families are the backbone of our economy. Keeping their taxes at their historically low rate is the best way to get our economy back on track. Fortunately, that middle-class tax cut extension is under threat. My friends on the other side of the aisle are demanding instead that the super-rich get their tax breaks. This isn't the way forward. We tried tax breaks for the rich and tax giveaways for the corporations during the Bush years. It didn't work. Let's keep tax rates low for the middle-class Americans and move this country forward. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some claim the solution to America's energy concerns is drill, baby, drill. Under President Obama, domestic oil and natural gas production increased every year, with the largest increase in the number of drilling rigs in American history. Domestic oil production last year was the highest in a decade, and natural gas production the highest ever in our history. Under President Obama, we've reduced foreign oil imports by 1 million barrels of oil per day. Foreign oil dependence was 60% of U.S. consumption in 2005. Under Bush, it's dropped to 49% in 2010 under Obama and is now on pace to fall to 36%, reversing trends since the Nixon presidency. By 2020, U.S. oil production will be up 11%, rivaling the largest producer in the world, Saudi Arabia. Under this president, U.S. oil production and exploration are booming, while foreign oil imports are plummeting. The U.S. consumes 21% of the world's energy, but contains 2% of proven oil reserves. That's why it's imperative we follow President Obama's lead and pursue multiple sources of energy to meet our ever-expanding needs. So to those who say drill more, President Obama can respond, we have, baby, we have.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, both sides agree on one thing. We must reduce taxes on the group of Americans that fuels our economy. We disagree as to who this group is. Republicans believe that it is the wealthy 2%. Democrats believe that it is the 98%, the middle class, that fuels our economy. The bottom line is, do you believe that the economy is going to be revived top down? But really it isn't. It's whether it's going to be a strong and secure middle class. Today the White House released some figures. For Hawaii, my state, 500,000 families qualify as middle class. And you know what it means? If we don't extend the middle class tax credits, tax breaks, it will mean $1,600 more per family per year. But more importantly, what does it mean for the super wealthy? If we do not, and we let those tax breaks expire like it should, it would mean we'll be able to reduce the deficit by about $1.16 trillion in 10 years. It's a no-brainer. Extend the middle-class tax credit for those who really fuel our economy and expire the Bush tax cuts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to call of the Chair.